Hello and welcome to Maths with Mr Amison. Today I'm going to be talking about adding and subtracting fractions. First thing I want you to do is to consider this statement here. Whether you think it's always true, sometimes true, or never true. You can find the lowest common denominator of a pair of fractions by multiplying their denominators. We'll come back to that as I go through this video. First though, let's have a look at this diagram. This diagram represents this fraction sum. 3/4 plus 1/6 equals 11/12. How does this represent 3/4? This represents 3/4 because each column is a quarter. There are 4 columns to this rectangle, so each of these columns represents a quarter. And in this shape here, if each pair of squares represents 1/6, because there are 6 pairs of squares in total in this shape. So if I add these two together, these 3/4, that's 9 squares, add this 1/6, that's 2 squares, makes 11/12 altogether, 11 squares out of 12 squares. Now why did I use 12 squares? Well, that's because 4 and 6 both go into 12. I can make 3/4 into 9/12, and I can make 1/6 into 2/12, which is exactly what I did here using equivalent fractions. You'll also notice that the common denominator of 12 is not 4 times 6. So in this case, the lowest common denominator is not the two denominators multiplied together. Let's take a look at this fraction sum here. 3/10 plus 3/5. 4 different options for you. I'm going to give you a few seconds to have a think about which of these you think are correct. Is there more than one correct answer? And can you identify what mistake is in each of the wrong answers? You can pause now to have a go. Okay, so we should have got that answer B and D are both correct. Well, that's because if you do 10 times 5, you get a denominator of 50. 3 times 5 is 15, and 10 times 3 is 30. So 15 plus 30, 45/50. You can also recognise that the lowest common denominator is 10, because 5 and 10 both go into 10. So it's 3/10 plus 6/10, which is 9/10 altogether. Now the mistakes people have made, this is a really common mistake, 6/15. In this answer here, what the person has done is done 3 plus 3 is 6 and 10 plus 5 is 15, thinking you can just add the numerators and add the denominators as they are to get 6/15. But it doesn't work like that, and I'll show you why. Let's use 2/5 add 1/5 as an example. If I do 2 plus 1, well that's 3, and 5 plus 5, that's 10. So 3/10, which is 0.3. But 2/5 is in fact equal to 0.4. So how can adding 1/5 to 0.4 give an answer that's less than 0.4? It doesn't make sense. So we actually do need to find the common denominator first. And the reason C is wrong, well, what they've done here is they've said that the lowest common denominator is 10, so it's 3/10 add 3/10, so it's 6/10. But what they've forgotten to do is convert the 3/5 into 6/10, because 3/5 is 6/10, not 3/10. You can't just change the denominator, you have to change the numerator in the same way. For example, a half plus a quarter is equal to, if it was equal to a quarter plus a quarter, because the common denominator is 4, well that's 2/4, adding the numerators only, because that's what you do when you've got a common denominator, which is a half. So how can a half plus a quarter still equal a half? It wouldn't make sense. When you change the denominator by multiplying by a factor, in this case multiplying by 2, I'd have to do the same to the numerator, multiplying that by 2. So let's do some of these as examples of how you should do this. If I have 3/10 add 2/5, Well, let's use a diagram first to represent this. Here I've got 3 out of 10 squares shaded in, and you can see that the lowest common multiple of 5 and 10 is 10, which is why I've used 10 squares. If I now represent 2/5 with those same 10 squares, there are 5 sets of 2. So 2/5 is 2 of those columns, so 2/5 is 4 of those tenths. So this is the same as 3/10 add 4/10. And when we add the two together with the common denominator, you can see each of these shapes are exactly the same size, therefore we can combine them. So 3 plus 4, well, that's 7/10 altogether. Each of these is 1/10, we have 7/10 altogether. So when you add fractions with a common denominator, you just add the numerators and you leave the denominator the same. 3/5 add 2/10. Well, it's similar. We can make the 3/5 into a certain amount of tenths. 3/5, if I multiply the 5 by 2 I get 10, multiply the 3 by 2 I get 6. So 3/5 is 6/10. 6/10 add 2/10 therefore is 8/10, and we can simplify that to 4/5. But that's not the point of this video today, so I'm not going to talk about simplifying. I'm just going to give these as simplified answers as well for those of you who know how to do that. 3/5 minus 2/15. So subtracting works the same way. The lowest common denominator, both 5 and 15 go into 15. Therefore the lowest common denominator is 15. So we have 9/15 because 5 times 3 is 15 and 3 times 3 is 9. And we have take away 2/15, so 7/15 altogether. 3/10 minus 2/15. Well, in this case, the lowest common denominator is not 15 anymore, not one of the numbers that is given. The lowest common denominator is in fact 30. 10 and 15 both go into 30. So 3/10, if I change this to a 30, it's multiplied by 3. So I've got to do the same to the numerator. It becomes 9/30. And this would become 4 out of 30. So it's 9/30, take away 4/30, which is 5/30, and simplifies to 1/6. 6/10 plus 4/15. Again, our common denominator is 30. Again, we multiply this by 3 and this by 2, but we've just doubled the 3 to the 6, doubled the 2 to a 4, and we've changed it to a plus. So we get 18/30 plus 8/30, which is 26/30, which simplifies to 13/15. Now finally, 2 and 6/10 take away 1 and 4/15. You may notice that the 6/10 simplifies first, and that's something that you can do, that's fine. You can do 2 and 3/5 minus 1 and 4/15 instead. Now you can see if we do that, do a bit of simplifying of the fraction first, the 15 and the 5, the lowest common denominator is 15. But we can't just do that straight away. What we should do is make these into improper fractions. So when you've got a mixed number, you need to make them into improper fractions first. So we get 13/5 minus 19/15. And we can now put this into something over 15 by multiplying the numerator and denominator by 3 to get 39/15 minus 19/15, which is 20/15, or in other words 4/3 altogether. And you could then convert that to 1 and 1/3, but that's not really the focus of this video either. So I'm going to leave you with these 6 questions for you to have a go at now that I've shown you the full method and talked about some misconceptions that you might have. Feel free to go back and watch over parts of the video that you need to help you answer these questions. Thanks very much, and until next time, have a good day.